And it is January 8th, 2021. Ryan Ray alongside Chris Fenton, Feeding the Dragon Show podcast. This is live streamed on my Twitter feed at Ryan Ray Sr., but also podcast on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere you can find good quality podcast at Chris Fenton. We took yesterday off for obvious reasons, I think, but it's good to see you today, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was good that we took off yesterday. Let things calm down a little bit. I'm just I'm paying attention here, but I just want to make sure I can forward this to my Twitter. But to not address what happened on Wednesday on any show is probably an elephant in the room that is not responsible. So we're going to have to address it. And I think we can tie it back into China and stay in our lane. But one of the things that made me really want to discuss this today, and I hope we don't create some sort of controversy, and I hope this podcast doesn't come back to haunt either of us, but we need to talk openly about it. I mean, this should be a safe space to be able to talk freely and voice opinions. But last night at dinner, my daughter, Kaylee, was talking about how in classes they were discussing Wednesday quite often. And it seemed that everybody had one opinion for the most part that was pretty much based on the pundits and everything that we've been hearing out there. Me being in the Los Angeles area, obviously a lot of people digest things from the left or the mainstream media versus the right. So I think a lot of that angle was from the left. So she said, well, I'd like to voice certain opinions, but I'm scared to, and I want to know how I approach it. And I said, look, it's very difficult to be, the aberration in a group with a certain opinion, but that's what this United States of America is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about voicing freely your thoughts, your criticisms, your ideas, and some of them might be bad and some of them might be good, but that's what this country was founded on. And I said, we raised you to be a good person, right? Like, I think no matter what your opinions are, whether they're right or wrong, or bad or good in certain ways as far as ideas, you're going to come at it from a place with a good heart and a good person and good ethics and morals. So you should think deeply about taking all the noise out of the equation and thinking about what Wednesday did affecting you. How did it affect you? What did it make you feel like? And then voice that from the heart, be emotional from it. And when I think about Wednesday, and I'm going to let you talk here, Ryan, just initially, some of the gut reactions I had was one of security, right? Like, I felt like the security I felt personally and as a nation was jeopardized. And it was the exact same feeling I had over the summer, right? I see no difference. I don't see a racism issue. I'm blinded to that. What I saw was a security issue that made me feel insecure, right? And if I look at that, why do I feel that? Well, it felt like both places were homes, things I considered homes, that were attacked. In Los Angeles, there was looting and rioting in the neighborhood of Hancock Park, where I used to live. And then there was a lot of it very near where we live in Manhattan Beach now. The same thing I feel when it comes to the Capitol building. I've been there many, many times. In fact, I posted on social media my first visit to the Capitol, which was in sixth grade. Our Florida high school, or our Florida sixth grade, went up there. It was a tradition every sixth grade class did. The Capitol and Capitol Hill feels like home to me in a way. It's something that's very American, very in my gut, is something that's partially mine, right? And the same thing as neighborhoods where I live. So when security is jeopardized in that kind of way, that instills a fear in me. And that was one of my initial gut reactions to this whole thing that happened on Wednesday. What was one of yours?
Yeah, real quick before I respond to that, for those watching, feel free to comment. We'll take comments live as we're here. And if you could, retweet or share the show wherever you're at so folks can follow along. So, I took it like this. The same way I took the George Floyd protest when they immediately happened, which was you had peaceful protest, and then I don't remember the timeline here, but eventually it evolved into rioting and looting. And what I said then was a couple things. One, I don't know, because I'm not there and I don't have access to enough cameras and stuff to know what percentage of the peaceful people ended up being the looters and the rioters. Okay, and I don't know. And then there's some people who are there who are just there to cause a problem. So you got peaceful people who get mad and go into rioting, looting, and you have people who cause problems. And there's kind of several circles in the Venn diagram there. I don't know how that looked for those. I don't know how it looked for this. And so that's the first initial pushback I wanted to push, because I saw some of my Republican friends be like, oh, well, this wasn't Republican people. This wasn't MAGA supporters. Like, no. Let's nuance it the same way. There definitely is some. I don't know how many, neither do you, but let's not start saying it had to be Antifa immediately. Let's not try to dismiss it, because back last summer, I wanted to be careful the same way. Say, well, some of this happened. And so the question is, so you have agitators who are in every group. They're just there to see the world burn. Those people, we put them over the side. I don't want to talk about them right now. What I want to talk about is the people who go from peaceful protesting and they're so pissed off, they start tearing down stuff, which is wrong. I don't condone it. I'm not saying that. What I think of, though, is what makes someone do that. I'm not going to tear down a building. I don't think you are. And my opinion is people feel like they're not being heard. And so I have 4 kids. You have 2. And as you know, that when your kids are frustrated or your spouse is frustrated, there are different tactics that people use to get your attention. And a kid that's not getting love and attention and affection, feels like to be ignored, they will act out. That's just how kids are. And so it's not unreasonable to expect adults who feel like they're being put on the sideline, whether it's for the George Floyd incident or this incident, to eventually get out of control. That doesn't justify it. That doesn't mean that they're actually not even being heard. There's a lot of things you could unpack there, but that's kind of my initial reaction: is what is making people feel like they're not being heard, and how do you address that issue? Because maybe you can't, but you have to start there, because it's not normal for masses of people to storm buildings. And so,
by the way, you're hitting right. And we were talking earlier about the fact that this is a situation where I feel like we need to look at what the cold is, not what the symptom is. And you hit it 100%, which is what's making people so angry, right? And I know people on the left can say, oh, those are fringe people and they're just upset and they're always going to be upset or whatever it is. But I feel like those people were representative of a very large part of America. And one thing that the symptom of this cold did, which I refer to as President Trump, is he was very vocal about hearing them, right? And whether he actually did anything on their behalf or not, that's debatable. It's not even worth getting into on this show. It's more about they felt like this guy listened to them and they were willing to follow him because he was a path to get them less angry, a path to get back what they feel like they've lost. And yes, I know we can talk about they think they lost the election, but I'm talking about the decimation of a middle class, Rust Belt towns that are essentially vacant of stores and any sort of jobs, Oxycontin addictions throughout the Appalachia. There are a lot of things that were essentially taken from a large part of this society via a system that has not been rewarding the masses. It has been rewarding a very small part of this country. And that's where the anger's from. And I know this anger personally, because in 2008, and if anybody has read my book, I'm very open about the fact that the financial crisis crushed the financial resources of my family. And ever since then, I still hold anger towards the system that not only created this buildup of something that everybody sort of knew was going to pop, the same way as everybody knew and was complicit in this Trump support, that at some point there was going to be a boiling point and something like Wednesday was going to happen. I mean, let's face it, there were a lot of enablers in that, a lot of enablers in the housing crisis that created the 2008 crash. That feeling of anger that I had, that not only did the system essentially let me down and take away a lot of my hard-earned sort of money and security financially, but also the ramifications of after that, and the fact that there was no justice for what occurred and all the people that were involved in what occurred, that created an anger in me. So I look at how I feel. And by the way, I'm extremely fortunate. I feel very blessed in my life, but there's still that little anger piece inside of me over 2008. So I can only imagine the anger of the protesters and the rioters and the various people involved last summer in those protests and those different incidents. And I can also identify in a very partial, small way, but also understand the anger and frustration of the people on Wednesday. And everybody that broke the law should be thrown in jail or have the book thrown at them. What was done illegally on Wednesday, it was terrible. But what I'm talking about is what caused that to happen. And it was more than just Donald Trump. It was an inherent anger that was building for a long time. It's why I bet several people in 2015 that either Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump would win the presidency in 2016. And I won that bet. It was because those were two outsiders that were promising something different. Now, whether either of them were going to deliver, that's debatable. But there was that promise. And that's why that anger led one of those two candidates to victory in 2016. So this has been occurring before Donald Trump. Donald Trump just amplified it as a major symptom of the cold.
Yeah, and two things here on that, and we'll tie it into China with this. First off, I don't know what percentage of Bernie supporters voted for Trump, but there was a decent amount, A. B, a lot of them didn't vote for Hillary because they were frustrated. And C, they were frustrated because the DNC, this is not a controversial take, go look it up, did things to prop up Hillary Clinton at the demise of Bernie Sanders. So when you see all that, you're like, the system is rigged against me. Now, you talk about these empty cities and these jobs that are gone overseas. When I was in China, well, not last year, it's 2 years now, 2019, we had a discussion about the messaging around the jobs going to China. And I remember as far back as I watched presidential debates, if you were a businessman of any stature and you'd sent jobs to China, people would say, oh, you sent jobs to China. Oh, you sent jobs to China. Oh, you sent jobs to China. That's terrible. We got to fix that. Trump's message was very clear. We're going to bring them back. Now, that issue aside, whether you can or you should or whatever aside, he just tweaked the message slightly, which is we're going to actually bring them back. I'm going to tariff them. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to bring them back. There was a lot of rhetoric around these jobs going away. I didn't know in 2016, and I've said this multiple times now, I didn't realize how much people in the Rust Belt were hurting. And so I was kind of caught off guard that Trump won because I didn't think that mean people in the Midwest were hurting. It's not, I live in the South. It's not really kind of my area where I hang out at. And so Trump's messaging, to your point, was he tapped into that, which is you lost your jobs, you're getting screwed, and I'm actually going to do something instead of just telling you what you already know. And so that's what he was able to tap into. Again, whether he was successful or not, it's a different story and all that. But that's the anger that he tapped into, and it had been festering for some time. Trump was just smart enough to figure out how to message it properly.
No, I mean, imagine driving down one of those main streets and looking at all the different empty storefronts and hearing on the radio, a bit part of Trump's speech where he's like, I'm going to bring jobs back to the Rust Belt. I'm going to bring jobs back to Ohio and West Virginia, et cetera. And then you flip the station and you hear, Hillary Clinton or somebody talking about how we're going to get rid of the coal industry or whatever it is. Right now I'm actually, I'm conservative when it comes to the environment. I'm not a big fan of coal, but if you're somebody in one of those towns and you hear something like that, you're going, wait a minute, one side is going to make it even worse for me. The other side's going to make it better. It just becomes pretty white and black in regards to who you vote for. And of course, we know, and we're talking about the complications of fulfilling those promises. It's sort of irrelevant. It's just what people believe and why they believe it. They believed it because they were angry and frustrated and needed some hope. And that was really what got either Bernie or Donald Trump into office, and it happened to be Donald Trump. And then, as time progressed, he became better and better at really conveying the fact that he was doing the job that they wanted him to do, and they became fervent supporters of him. And it got to the point where on Wednesday, unfortunately, they believed in him so much that they took things literally of what he said, and marched into the Capitol and did some terrible things. And I just, people that did illegal stuff, that was not a protest. That was a riot. There was looting. There was damage done to both of our homes. The Capitol building, everybody in this country owns a piece of. That was terrible in so many different ways, and people need to be punished for that. But we can't lose sight of what created this boiling under that boiled over on Wednesday. And the same thing happened this past summer. And we're seeing it, in places like Oregon or various other places. That Charlotte, North Carolina had it recently. Like, this is something we need to address, and it's going to take red and blue and everybody else to figure this out. And right now, I don't have a lot of hope. I'm hoping that I start to think about things differently and process this a little more. But right now, it feels a little hopeless.
Yeah, and I think part of the hopelessness comes from the fact that the Trump issue is one thing, but there's also another issue that, depending on who you ask in America, depends on how much they trust what they're hearing, right? And so, I know my parents, I'm assuming your parents as well, kind of grew up in what people refer to as the golden age of news, which is debatable, but the golden age of news, where they got the news and that was what they're told. And then these pesky podcasts came along, and newsletters and things where you could get access to different ideas. And what we've seen is that not only are there more ideas that are presented to you on Fox or MSNBC or CNN, sometimes they're actually better, sometimes they're a little bit more nuanced, and sometimes they're a lot worse, right? They're all over the spectrum. And so as people are accessing more and more information, they're trying to figure out what is going on. What has happened is, it would be like this. It would be like as if you woke up one day and you realized that your parents, by and large, had been kind of misleading you, not telling you the full truth. And then once you get out there, you're like, oh my gosh, my parents have kind of been hiding all this stuff from me. I don't know what to believe anymore. And as a nation, that's kind of where we are. The people know that there's a lot of stuff that's wrong. They don't all agree on what's wrong or why it's wrong, but we just know there's a lot of stuff wrong. We can't agree on how to fix it. And so we're in this period of trying to disseminate what's truth, what's not truth, how to proceed, how not to proceed. And it is frustrating. It is a hopeless kind of feeling, because you go, well, how do you convince all these people? But it's actually, I think, a good cleansing that needs to happen, because what led to the frustration with Trump was, and this is a Republican Democrat issue, they lied to the American people over and over and over and over again about why we are in the situation that we are, and ignored the financial crisis. They don't really talk about all of the Fed monetary policies and all the stuff that led to that. So as people are learning the truth and the falsehoods, they're trying to figure out what's true and not. And that causes tension. It causes tough conversations. But that's part of the thing that you have to go through, in my opinion, at least. And so I agree that it does feel hopeless, but I also think that it's better than what it was before. It just feels worse right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I'm cautiously optimistic. You're right on that. It's very tough to go through as a pessimist any sort of part of life. So I think I'm just digesting what happened the other day in a way that hopefully will, repair itself a bit. And I think, we addressed that underlying anger that created both the unrest over the summer and the unrest that we saw the other day. I think a lot of that had to do with financial security of these people. I think the gut instinct of what we were watching unfold on television hit home, in the personal security issue. I think the way, and I posted the way that CCTV, the broadcast network in China, was covering the event, that hit me in a sort of national security kind of way, in a patriotic pride kind of way. So those were all gut instincts that I felt that were just, terrible reactions that it all created inside of me as a person. The part that I think now, which is going to be interesting to see, and another part that created a lot of anger in me out of 2008, was whether we can address some of the justice and fairness that comes out of what happened on Wednesday, right? Like, because we're already seeing everybody want, the president to die on the sword. And by the way, he instigated that in a terrible, terrible way. But and obviously should face ramifications for that. But there were a lot of enablers too, and a lot of those enablers are almost rats jumping off the ship as it's starting to sink. Are any of those enablers going to have any sort of justice or fairness, result of their enabling over the last 4 or 5 years? Are we going to see just a situation where, Bernie Madoff goes to jail and a bunch of like low level, mortgage brokers that were lying to consumers go to jail, but all the big fish, the people that were really responsible for the mortgage crisis and everything else, nothing happens to them. In fact, they get rewarded richly. Are we going to see these people just sort of bounce back as if they never helped enable this process to begin with? That's a question. And I think depending on how we address it as a nation, we might create even more anger around this situation, or we could abate the anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on the Trump thing, just real quickly, I saw some people saying, well, he didn't call for violence. And some people say he did call for violence. My take is that for those of you who don't know, Chris and I have a friendly relationship. We're not BFFs. We don't talk all the time. So I don't know Chris personally that well. Nice enough guy. You like me. We like you. So we're friends in that sense, but we don't hang out regularly. So I don't know how to push your buttons is what I'm saying. Right. But if I knew you really well, I'd know how to push your buttons. Like I know how to push my wife's buttons or she pushed mine. Right. So my view is what Trump did is he knew how to push the buttons. My read is he wanted them to go down there, holler, yell, put the pressure on the Congress, on the Senate. I don't think he planned for them to storm the building, but I do think he wanted kind of a riled up crowd outside so that people inside would go, oh my gosh, maybe we should do this, or maybe he knew nothing was going to happen. He just wanted to rile them up. But he did want to get them riled up. So when you look at what's the responsibility for that, I don't know. I don't have a good answer because that's kind of my take on what he was trying to do there. And the same token, though, there's no doubt that people, plenty of senators and stuff, were riling people up on the right and the left, though, because the left has spent plenty of time mocking Trump supporters as stupid, ignorant, fascist, racist. They have done nothing to unite either side. So you have that as well. But let me ask you this, Chris, the side of China. Would you rather be sitting here today in America, knowing all that we have access to and knowing what we know, or get your news through WeChat in China?
Well, no, I want full access to what's happening in our country. I absolutely love, democracy. The idea of being part of a communist country would just be death to me in a lot of ways. And in fact, I sort of boasted a bit about the CCTV coverage that I saw the other day, even though it was terribly biased and probably was the greatest hits of all the bad stuff that happened on Wednesday.
Right.
I do pat on the back the United States of America for the fact that Chinese journalists have full access to get whatever information they want out of this country as far as news is concerned without being worried of being censored. And then their platforms are actually allowed access to the United States of America. Where my issue is the reciprocity for our journalists and our journalistic platforms, which tend to be banned in China or severely limited in the kind of news that they're allowed to report on. The amount of journalists that actually have access to the Chinese market is very limited too. The reciprocity for that fairness, that freedom of speech, that ability to report news uncensored is completely non-existent in China, and something that we actually protect as a nation here in the United States for any country.
So yeah, and the reason I use WeChat is that it's kind of a social media app where you can share and take videos and stuff. But if what were to happen in DC happen in Beijing, there would be no WeChat pictures and videos of that. You'd be censored. They'd probably shut down the app temporarily and whatever other social media apps. It would just go away. And so one of the things that frustrates me with U.S.-based China commentators is they almost forget about the other side of the coin that we're talking about. And I never want to forget that. I have no bone against the Chinese people. I wish them the best. We got to talk through these issues to get there, but I also have to acknowledge what it is that they're doing. And so whatever you think of Trump, whatever you think of what happened, understand that most people in China that are my age, I'm 35, don't know what Tiananmen Square is. I mean, they know what it is, but they don't know what happened there when we think, as we say it. And so, if you were to open up the floodgates in China tomorrow, they just turned on the news, we can't fathom what would happen then, because that whole your parents are being lying to you would be on steroids for 1.34 billion people. And so I think we've kind of taken for granted, because we do have access to information, that this is part of the problem. It does cause issues, it does cause tensions, but the alternative is to be like China, and that's not healthy, because they don't know what's going on in the world, and that's a bad spot to be in.
Well, if there's one moment in my book that it seems like people constantly comment on, it's they were unaware that anybody born right around Tiananmen Square incident in 1989, June 4, or afterwards, has never, if they've lived their whole life in China, they've never seen that photograph of the man in the tank, in front of the tanks, standing in front of them. That picture is non-existent. It's vanished inside China. And I in the book, I tell anybody they can test that if they happen to be a freshman at a university and they have a Chinese national who's in the US for the first time and studying with them. You can actually show them that picture and say, have you ever seen this? And they'll say no. That's how hardcore their clampdown on news is. And, I hear people talk all the time about how biased news is and all that kind of stuff. And let's face it, we've moved from a point where it was unbiased journalism to something that is almost like watching news in an op-ed type of form. It's very opinionated news. But you have to admit, in the United States of America, we do have the ability to, and I did it quite often on Wednesday, to watch MSNBC and CNN and then flip over to Fox News and then go on to Twitter and see somebody on the right talking about it or showing video, and then somebody on the left showing video, or somebody that's a libertarian showing video. Like, there were a lot of different sources we had access to formulate our own opinion about what was happening.
Okay. And so, any final thoughts on this issue? I do think I'm always concerned when you go back to, after 9/11, there was this rush to fight terrorism. And in doing so, we enabled the Patriot Act and all kinds of things that have resulted in, from my perspective at least, terrible government overreach, because we were afraid. And I think that here you have an issue where there are people, I'm working on a post by Andrew Yang talking about how to balance out the media and all this stuff. It's like, okay, I don't want to react to something because it was bad and then have more bad things come as a result. And China, in this case, is an easy way to look to it and say, okay, this is how China would handle the situation. And that's bad. It's bad for their people. It's bad for us. It's bad for everyone involved, because they're over there mocking us, as you say, about how terrible it is in America, while they're literally enslaving the Uyghurs.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, look, if anybody in a decision-making capacity were watching this, I would implore upon them to think about what the cold is versus the symptom, right? Like, Donald Trump literally came about and became our president because people were angry and wanted something that was completely different and outside the system that had betrayed them. Bernie Sanders, the same situation. If we look at, now we're finally getting rid of President Trump on the 20th, everything's going to be great. We're going to be in for a real surprise, and it's not going to get better. That's just a whack-a-mole. We took some nasal passage stuff that allowed us to breathe freely. Now I can go to sleep and not have a stuffed up nose, but you still have the cold, right? And you're going to wake up in the morning with that stuffed up cold and the nose, and you're going to feel crappy and all that kind of stuff. So we need to be very diligent about the fact that there is an underlying cold to this. It has created and amplified various symptoms that have come to life, President Trump being one of them. And we need to figure out, how do we fix these things? And if you look at what we talk about quite often here, which is this globalism that has been a big mission of our capitalistic system here, that has decimated a large part of our population. We need to rethink and rebalance how we apply that globalistic instinct to our actual Main Street economy here. Number two is, I think if you've seen The Social Dilemma, that documentary on social media, everybody in social media knows how powerful it is in regards to dividing the country. Everybody knows how easy it is to use social media to bifurcate the way people think, the way people interact, the way people talk, and the way people get news or facts. We need to think about the way that we decipher real information to people so that it's as unbiased as possible, so that we actually have people believing what is true versus what is false. Because if there's no sort of factual foundation of what we're doing here in this country, it's going to be very hard to tackle any challenge. So it's, we got a lot of big challenges in front of us. It's going to take red and blue to do this. But I can't stress enough that we can't look at President Trump as sort of, oh, we just remedied it, now everything's good. That is not what January 20th designates. We got a lot of work to do. We have to figure out how to fix this cold. And I am feeling more, it's almost like a therapy session. I'm feeling a little more hopeful after 30 minutes that maybe we can get there.
Okay, well, let's go to just a couple quick stories here. Let's kind of talk about the news. This is what was going off in the background a second ago. This is from ABC News, and here we go, Chris. This is what propaganda looks like in the fullest, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually I tweeted that. I saw the ABC article, so I wanted to tweet out the actual tweet from the Chinese embassy, which I thought was really interesting. I got a lot of throwback for that, and then I followed it up with the ABC News article. That's a bit of propaganda, but it's also wolf warrior diplomacy propaganda, where they're actually pushing that narrative outside of the country to get us to try to believe what's happening there in Xinjiang province. We're going to see a lot more of that. It's, sort of daunting to see.
Yeah, and if you can't read kind of the subtitle here, it says eradication of extremism has given Xinjiang women more autonomy, says report. Talk about the Uyghur women. And so essentially they're saying that enslaving people, which they wouldn't call it that, but it's learning, getting them learned, teaching them, has allowed them to have more autonomy and more freedom. I was talking to someone before we got on, and I have it kind of, I know you said that it kind of stings you when the Chinese are kind of mocking us. For me, it's a little bit different. I don't know why any person on our side, and it's a good time to talk about it, why we should take the Chinese news 100% seriously. It's a good time to remind folks that they are promoting propaganda, and this is a great example of that, is that they are promoting propaganda. And so I am curious though, with like the Uyghur story, that is one story. It doesn't get enough attention like the Hong Kong story did, but it does seem to stay in the news just enough that maybe if they're not careful, we might convert some Chinese nationals here in the U.S. to kind of not turn on the CCP, but realize that there's more propaganda coming out of China than what they would be led to believe.
Yeah, it's sort of funny too to see. I agree with you on that, and then just to see how they, there's obviously a lot of Chinese influence on Twitter and social media, and I was looking at it right now just to see what that tweet was doing that the Chinese embassy sent out, and it's not common when you have the likes be about 1/5 of what the retweets are, right? Like they're, in order to reach a lot of people, like liking it just keeps it all within the same sphere of who's reading it. Retweeting approaches another 1,000, another 1,000, another 10,000, another 100, whatever it is. And it's just sort of interesting to see how much retweeting there is versus liking, right? And, I just wonder what kind of troll effect that is and what kind of, bots are working on that. But it's something where, I'm not even sure why they tweet that out in the United States of America. I don't think that kind of propaganda is going to work here. I just don't see people going, oh, well, maybe it's not all that bad. If anything, it just reminds us of what we think is bad happening over there. It's a weird, and I don't know if it's because China's so used to their propaganda working on their own populace that they just think that they can do it everywhere else and will buy into it. And if that is the case, you can understand why they thought Wolf Warrior diplomacy was going to be so successful, right? But I just feel like we're wiser than that, and we're not going to fall for it, and it does backfire on them.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I do think their Twitter accounts do have value. So the other day I saw it was an ambassador from China to a very small African nation, and he was retweeting another ambassador, and they were talking about their relationship with Russia, and they were both saying that relationship with Russia is good, and there's no ceiling, it goes to the top, da da da. I think that's quite valuable because let me tell you something. Those ambassadors are not tweeting whatever they want to tweet. They are on message. And so they are messaging to the world that today, right now, that the Russia-China relationship is in a good, healthy spot. And so whatever the reasoning is, I don't know, but you should take that as going, okay, they're putting this out there. They want you to know this. Now, on the same token, if you go to, and you've been to these things, I've met with some Chinese officials and I've heard them speak, and you have as well. They have, and I swear, I don't know if it's a script that they're given that they memorize, but it's impressive. When they get a message, it is on message. And so part of their policy procedure is to stay on message. And so I don't know if it even matters to them if we believe it or not. I don't know if that's even if they even care. It's to stay on message. And if you say it over and over enough again, I guess they expect people to believe it. But we were at a deal one time, and I asked the guy, kind of a tough question. And, his answer was not we think our political elite answer questions weird. Like they have, I kid you not. I swear someone was in his ear telling him what to say. It was impressive. We have one country, two systems. We do this, we do that. And then all of his talking is, and so for the Westerners, it's probably good to remind ourselves that when these official accounts are tweeting out something, that is the message that they want out there. In the Uyghur Muslim case, obviously it's tried to deflect, but in other cases, it is to notify you, to put you on notice what's going on, especially with like the China-Russia relationship.
Well, and even more nefarious than that, and I'll have to admit myself as a guilty party in it. I actually gave a speech up at Stanford in 2012. And that speech was about the film diplomacy and the interaction between the two countries on this movie Looper, which is there's a poster behind me.
Good movie.
And the whole night before, like I was coached by the China side on what I was allowed to say, what I couldn't say, what the main directive of the message was going to be. They were very aware that I like to go off script, so they told me 100% I couldn't say X, Y, and Z. I actually write about it in the book itself. It was really something that I didn't think anything of at the time, and now I look back at it and I go, "What the f was I thinking?" Right. But quite frankly, you can see it with and I'm not saying he's guilty of it now, but there's a lot of these big players, whether it's Ray Dalio or Steve Schwartzman or even Lloyd Blankfein or some of these others who really toe the party line in order to get their business in there, and they're being coached by the CCP also on what they can and can't say. I'm hoping everybody's woken to that and not doing it as much, but if you do watch big industry players, C-suite executives talk about China, a lot of the time there's talking points in there that are specifically delivered by the CCP for them to say.
Yeah, and we should be clear, there are things that you can be critical of the CCP publicly that they will let slide. It's not that you can't ever be critical of anything, but there are things that are definitely violations that if you say them, free Hong Kong, there are certain lines in the sand that they just will not let you do, because you might be listening to this going, well, I've heard some of these guys be critical of China. There's they're not stupid. They understand that you had to be able to say some things, but it's not the things that they don't want you to say. And that's part of the control issue, is that you can say this, but you can't say that.
Well, and it's always a fluid situation. I mean, I gave a keynote at the China Forum in Beijing last fall, and I told them what I wanted to talk about, which was the freedom of speech issues that were actually inhibiting Disney to respond to the Mulan crisis. And I had somebody there pay attention to whether they were censoring my script because they had the script ahead of time. And they didn't. And then on top of it, the South China Morning Post allowed me to write an op-ed about it, which was edited a bit, but I could argue that was just to get the word count down. But it's interesting. I feel like they have a little bit of that pressure release flexibility in order to give us a little criticism, penetration to that market, but it's very limited. And one thing they might let slide today might be a thing that becomes taboo tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. We got a couple other stories. Let's see here. Just want to talk real quickly, go through these. China is locking down another city of 11 million people in an attempt to curb the worst COVID-19 flare-up in months, according to them at least. And so they have 66 new cases, 35 are asymptomatic. And they're locking down, 11 million people. Seems like a tad bit of an overreaction.
Yeah, except Hebei is right on the outskirts of Beijing, so I think they got to be a little nervous about that proximity. And then on top of it, they're out there touting to everyone how excellent they've handled this. So any sort of flare up not only will create some discontent among their own populace, but also, whatever credibility they think they have globally, they think they'll lose if they can't contain this thing right off the bat. And remember, they're a totalitarian sort of regime. So it's no skin off of their back to lock down 11 million people.
Yes, I'm poking fun at our U.S. medical experts. Like, China's handled it really well. It's like, I don't know. 66 cases, locked down 11 million people seems to be that's more of what I'm spoofing off of than anything else. The issue is they have the right to do it though. Like, it's not in dispute that they are within their right to lock everyone down. It's just, to me, it's libertarian. It's a little bit overstop. Okay, let's see here. One more I think we have time for. Chinese censorship invades the U.S. via WeChat. I think it was Bill Bishop that tweeted this out. He's like, good to see the Washington Post just learned this. Oh.
Yeah, it goes into that thing where I just don't understand. Like, Washington Post actually has been great about my book and given me a platform there, and I love reading it. It's obviously on the MSM left side of the aisle a little bit, and for some reason, censorship and freedom of speech rights seem to not be as beholden to the Democratic Party as the Republican Party. So I think people are slower on the Democratic side to sort of call out the insanity of what's happening in that right that Americans have. But yeah, I saw that Bill Bishop tweet too. I think I retweeted it out. And, hopefully, I just hope everybody's getting more awakened to what's happening here and we can start addressing things, because like I said, and we debate this all the time, but addressing the China issue for the United States of America will actually make things better for the masses of the United States of America, which will lower the anger and frustration threshold of the masses of the United States of America, so that we might not see repeats of what happened Wednesday or over the summer.
Okay. Well, why don't we leave off on a good note? Why don't you give us a good behind the scenes, either Looper or Iron Man, or just a good movie story, Chris, to send everyone up on Friday? Because you're the movie guy here, not me.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of them. I'll just say it was interesting, and I talk about it in the book, but in the opening, I talk about this massive premiere that we're throwing in the Forbidden City of Beijing. It's the first ever massive Hollywood premiere. We had Robert Downey Jr. coming in, And what's interesting about China is they got great security if it's part of the Communist Party security or the PLA or the PAP. But if you're trying to get private security to do something on a massive scale like that, it's very difficult. So the only way we could find enough people to do that, I mean, we're talking about 1,000 big looking, intimidating security guards in order to hold back crowds, as we had to go to the outskirts of Beijing and round up in these buses a bunch of farmers out there that were, it was essentially still the winter time, so they weren't farming. So you give them a few RMB and a really cheap, like Men in Black style suit, and they show up. They didn't know what the heck they were supposed to do other than just stand there and look intimidating. So that's just one of like 1,000 crazy stories. One thing I wanted to say before we're off is that if anybody watches this and is not reading your newsletter, I highly recommend them to do that. I thought your comparison of your individual family life to sort of the way things unraveled on Wednesday and the reaction of politicians and all that stuff, I thought that was a really interesting simile or metaphor. I'm not exactly sure which one it is, but anyway, I highly recommend your newsletter, so people should read that.
I appreciate the kind words. And I was going to say something else before we got off, and you flattered me. Oh, the Forbidden City. I was reading your book. I remember reading that story. The Forbidden City is a huge, huge place. I always wonder, like, how many people could you fit inside that place for a movie premiere if you really wanted to? Because you could, I mean, that's a big place. You could spend all day there and not even soak up what's there. So I'd have loved to have been there for that night. Is there video of that somewhere? You can go see the premiere online.
Oh yeah. You know what I'll do is I'll post it and tag you on it. It's one of my favorite teasers of anything. It's a Chinese teaser of the upcoming Iron Man 3 premiere, and it shows like all the crazy like stars and everybody that showed up for it, and it's like in crazy Chinese, really fast, almost like FedEx commercial type of talk, and it's a good 90 seconds, so I'll retweet that out. Yeah,
please do. Okay. I guess we'll be back probably next week. Yep. And so, folks, you can download the podcast anywhere. It should be anywhere now distributed. If it's not on your platform, let me know, and I will make sure we do our best to get there. If you do like the show, give us a rating, review in Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're at. We'd appreciate that, and hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Chris, anything before we get out of here?
Yeah, everybody have a great weekend. Be safe, and let's get started on the next generation and the next part of America's history in a good way.
There we go.